2, 1. Hello, this is Del
Hello.
Chatterson. Del Chatterson from Montreal and Winona Kent from New Westminster. We're both Crime Writers of Canada members, professional author members, and we're both regional representatives. Winona is the representative for British Columbia, the Yukon and Northwest Territories, which is a large part of the country. With, I don't know, how many readers or how many members are in that region, Winona, do you know?
About 64.
About 64, okay. I'm responsible for the territory of Quebec and the Atlantic provinces, and we're only 24.
Wow.
Even though we have a French division, we don't have a lot of French writers in Crime Writers of Canada. To introduce myself, and then Winona, I'm a former entrepreneur, business advisor, and writer for entrepreneurs with a few books of nonfiction behind me and dozens of articles over the last couple of decades. And I've also now written 3 novels in what I call the Dale Hunter series. You can see my poster behind me, which I used to take to live events, which we haven't had for more than a year now. The Dale Hunter series is about an engineer in the, an entrepreneur in the computer business in Montreal, fighting international crime and corruption in his business, trying to save his business and his family from the mafia and other crooked business partners and more, which is not my true story, but it's mostly fiction, allegedly, as my grandson says. So that's my story and my introduction. Winona, tell us a bit more about yourself and where you've come from and what your books are about.
Well, I've come from a very varied background. I worked full-time all of my adult life, and I wrote novels while I was working full-time, and I always swore I would never get a job that involved any form of writing, because I figured if I do that, I'm going to use up my creative brain for my employer, and I will never have any time for myself. So I always had jobs that had nothing to do with writing, and I simultaneously worked on writing novels at the same time. And I've written spy novels and mysteries and time travel novels. And right now I'm focusing on mysteries, and I'm writing in the first person as a guy. My main hero is a jazz musician, and none of this has anything to do with me whatsoever. It comes completely out of my imagination.
It's all out of your imagination. But I notice you have actually been educated in English and creative writing, and you have a master's in fine arts and creative writing.
Yep. I did all that.
Now you're studying screenwriting.
I did study screenwriting. I did that back in 2003. I started out with a BA in Lit from the University of Regina, and then went out to work as a travel agent for about between 5 and 8 years, depending on what you look at. And then I left that business. I burned out, and I came out to UBC in Vancouver specifically to work on my MFA in creative writing. It was the first thing I'd ever really done for myself, my own decision, what I really wanted to do. That lasted for a couple of years. And my primary contribution there is, I don't know if you're aware of Prism magazine. It's a literary journal, and it's Prism, Prism.
Oh, I thought you said Prism.
Prism, no. And it's been around for a very long time. And one of the things that you did when I was there anyway was you could be on the board of Prism magazine, and my legacy is that I started their fiction competition, which is still going. So this was way back in 1985 is when I graduated. So I set it all up so that the next incoming board could implement it, and it's still going in various forms, but that was my idea. And so that's my legacy. And then I went out to...
Your creative writing has always been separate from your full-time job or your career?
Absolutely. Yeah. After I got my MFA, I went to work for then BC Tel, became TELUS, so the telecommunications company. And I worked there for 18 years. I have no idea where the time went. But I was in their word processing department. I was in their travel department. I was in their learning services department. And then finally, they offered me a buyout. Excuse me for a second. They offered me a buyout. They gave me an awful lot of money to leave because they wanted to downsize. This was around 2002.
Okay.
So I took it. I thought, yeah, I'm going. And that's when I went to film school. I went to film school in 2003. And because I'd been writing novels and I didn't feel I was really getting anywhere. So I wanted to learn how to write screenplays. So I went there for a year and I learned how to write screenplays, and I took a little time out to work with a writing partner. And we wrote screenplays for about 7 years while I was working full time again. After film school, I went to work at UBC. And I stayed there for 15 years in the School of Population and Public Health, which has absolutely nothing to do with writing, but it has a lot to do with epidemiology. So it's very relevant right now. So I learned all about epidemiology.
Okay. Well, you have a good opportunity to work that into a novel now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I might. I have the knowledge of what epidemiologists do and how they're trained.
There you go. That could be helpful. And there's a lot of us are learning more about what epidemiologists do and what they can do for us. But you've written in a lot of different genres and with different themes, from musicians to spy stories to fantasy romance, and I'm not sure what else. Do any of them come particularly easy or more naturally for you?
Sorry, say again?
Well, there's quite a change. I'd like you to hear how you feel about what's different from one to the other. What was hard for you? What was easy?
Okay. Well, I write about my passions. And so I started out with a couple of spy novels because at the time I was extremely passionate about The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which was, the old TV spy series in the 1960s. So my first two novels involved a guy who played a spy on TV in the 1960s, and it turns out he's a spy in real life. So it involved him and his family and nefarious plots to take over the world, and the London Underground, which is another one of my passions. And after that, I did 3 time travel novels, spurred on by another one of my passions, which is family tree research. I have a mysterious great grandfather who I know everything about him after he married my great grandmother, but virtually nothing before that. I can't even find his birth record. And this is in England. And this spurred me to write first a screenplay while I was just after film school. And then I turned it into a novel, had much more success with it as a novel. And that spurred 3 time travel novels about the same 2 characters.
And you must have fans in different genres that follow you.
I do. I actually have fans who followed me all the way through, who read everything that I've written. But
they followed your transitions to
they have.
That's fun.
I found that it's different groups of people, and I can't really slot myself into a specific genre, which is kind of a problem when you're trying to market yourself.
I think it's only a problem from a marketing perspective. And
from a marketing perspective, exactly.
I said to another writer recently, I think it's a sign of a lazy reader or a lazy reviewer. They want to know, what genre is it? What am I looking at? What can I expect?
And they have certain expectations too. And if you don't fit those expectations, it's sometimes automatically it doesn't hit all these points in this genre, therefore can't be any good. So they start looking for reasons why it's not.
I was persuaded by my first editor to call it a crime thriller series. And I think thriller kind of overstates it, because it's, for me, it's a little more subtle. It's not all car chases and shootouts and
thriller.
The hero is not in constant danger, and they digress into business issues and social commentary.
I know you think Jason Bourne, or you think James Bond or something like that with a thriller. It doesn't have to be.
I would like to make it more interesting. As David Baldacci said, I'd like to learn something. As a reader, I like to read stories that I didn't already know everything about the people, and it's not all just sort of escapist action adventure series, and it's more challenging and more interesting for me, and hopefully for the reader, but the editors don't all agree.
Well, I had a publisher who tried to slot me into some genre with my time travel, and they couldn't. They tried science fiction, which didn't work, because it's not science fiction at all. It's more gentle time travel romance. And then they tried to put me into romance, and that didn't work at all, because that is such a huge. You have to follow certain conventions if you're writing romance. I wasn't. And so I ended up not with them anymore. So now I'm indie publishing, and I tried mysteries because Actually, a couple of people said to me, you need to switch to a different genre, get away from the time travel thing. And a
Okay.
friend of mine suggested, what about this guy that you wrote about in this standalone novel in 2012, set on a cruise ship in Alaska,
I,
based on my sister had a job as a captain's secretary on board cruise ships.
oh,
And I traveled with her a few times, and I got to see life from the other side, from an officer's point of view, as opposed to the traveler's point of view. And so, and I met a musician who was working up in the lounge. He was a guitarist, and he had his own backing tracks, and he was up there and he sounded phenomenal. And we sat and talked for a while. And so he was the inspiration for Jason in Coldplay. And
okay.
Coldplay was just a mystery. Bad things happened to him during one of these cruises to
Okay.
Alaska. And so I brought Jason back and wrote a novella about him called Disturbing the Peace, which takes place in Peace River, Alberta, actually. He's based in London, but he's trying to find a missing musician. And he ends up in Peace River in the middle of February, and it's the coldest place he's ever been in his life. And I've been there.
Well, it's interesting. They sound like intriguing stories, and
Yeah.
And according to the reviews and what readers must find, that the writing is good and they're interesting enough, whatever the genre.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's no, that's a compliment for sure, and I know it's an accomplishment. It's not easy to do.
It
For
is,
me,
and
it was the
yeah.
hard transition for me was to go from business writing, nonfiction, mostly in books of advice for entrepreneurs and articles and blog posts for the couple of decades actually, and switching to fiction. And as I've told people, a lot of the stories are the same. I've just added more crime and more drama. But
whatever made you?
Sorry,
I was gonna say, whatever made you want to switch from doing what's basically a very cold kind of nonfiction kind of scripted sort of thing to fiction.
If anything, I was kind of inspired by John Grisham's success with legal fiction. I thought, well, why I should write business fiction. I think I could do that. I think I could do that as well as
That's
John.
A great genre, business fiction.
Yes, well, it's yeah. There are, like, one of his novels called The Firm, which was his first big success, and the movie, of course, made a huge difference to his success. But and maybe Tom Cruise as well helped. I don't know.
Probably.
But, and it's funny, I've heard Jean Le Carré complain that, why is it that John Grisham, he's not as good a writer as me? How come he gets better actors? And how come his movies
I love John Le
than
Carré. He's one of my favorite writers.
Yeah, he is a better writer, and I've tried to imitate him a little bit or learn from him, and that's the best we can do, I think. So that, yeah, and that's what's different about the nonfiction. You have to have a message, and you want to get to the point as quickly as possible. And I usually give what I call real life examples. I talk about a client or my own experience and communicate the lesson through storytelling. So in the fiction, it's just a matter of making less of a lesson and more of a story.
And you made it all up.
It's all this extra stuff. You have to worry about what was the weather like, and what was he wearing, and how did he sit, and what are his personal characteristics.
And you have to have a story too. I mean, you have to have an actual plot.
Well, yeah, it's interesting also because I'm not so good at the whodunit kind of mystery. You start with a body somewhere, and then you work out who did it and why and what's the background story. I tend to start with as I use a little bit more the Stephen King formula. Put an ordinary person in a dilemma and let him figure out how to get out of it. You have to invent an interesting dilemma. So the first my first book is about an entrepreneur in Montreal in the 1980s computer business. And he gets approached by the mafia gangsters for protection money. And it just kind of escalates from there to a murder plot and a few other things. And he kind of switches from one bad guy to another, and he meets a renegade sort of vigilante justice guy who becomes his new friend. And in the course of the novels, his friend, Frank the Fixer, as he's called, becomes a licensed PI. So he works with Dale Hunter in future episodes or future books to help solve the crimes. And the second one is one of the vengeful mafia figures comes after Dale Hunter's wife, kidnaps her as a plan to sort of bait a trap for him and invite and try and kill Dale Hunter again. And then and there's a bit of smuggling and so on. The third one is more about money laundering and starts with his BMW getting blown up in the driveway, which happened in the neighborhood where I live in Montreal. So some of these things are based on true stories, but not necessarily my true stories.
I was going to ask you that. I was going to say, and you're sure none of this has happened to you.
Well, I tell, as my grandson says, allegedly fiction, but, and what I normally tell people is that a lot of them are based on my worst nightmares, which never really happened, but I did worry about getting called upon for protection money, or we did have break-ins. I never got held up in the computer business in the 1980s was very vulnerable to theft, break-ins. It was a valuable product, easy to steal and easy to resell. But,
how do you do your research?
Yes, I didn't have to do a whole lot of research. And so I'm now going through old client files, trying to find new stories to tell. And the current novel that I'm writing on, I kind of jumped forward 30 years, and I've got Dale Hunter and Frank the Fixer in 2019 before COVID. And in this episode, they have Frank's cousin his daughter has been kidnapped into a sex trafficking ring in Boston. The title is Bad Boys in Boston, and I came up with the titles 5 years ago, so I had to make up a story about somebody.
I do that too. I get the titles and then I write the stories to fit the titles.
Yeah.
I didn't used to do that.
I get these ideas in my mind, and then I go back to my notebook and think, what was I thinking? Where did I get that?
Well, I've got
the fifth one in my series because I had 5 in mind when I started the Dale Hunter series about an entrepreneur in the 1980s. The next one is called Crash Landing, which is about the end of his business, which doesn't end well in the 1980s or 90s. I haven't quite decided how much I'm going to review or how much of that is true story, because there is, again.
Are you gonna end your series, or are you gonna carry on for as long as?
Well, no, I'm waiting for the call to make a movie series like Kathy Reich.
Yeah.
And I figure with two interesting characters and a series of events over 30 years, there's lots of material there.
Absolutely, you need an agent.
I'm working on it.
Trust me, I've been to film school. I know these things.
That is my next mission, but I'd like to finish, like I've rewritten the first 3 novels into a trilogy, a one volume trilogy. And I'm writing the 4th one now. It should be the standalone, and it should be, I think my apprenticeship is done, so hopefully it's good enough to get the attention of agents.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I would love to see my Jason novels made into a film series or a TV series.
Well,
I mean,
you sound
God
like
knows.
But do you find when you're writing them, like I've had advice from writing coaches to think of a movie, think of your book visually, so it would make a good movie, or because readers now are so much accustomed to watching TV and movies that they tend to read a book and then run the film in their head. So you need to write it the same way. Do you find that that's an easy transition back and forth?
It is. Yeah, I actually do see it in my head as a movie as I'm writing it. Yeah. And my strength as a writer was always my dialogue. It is always my dialogue. And it was my strength at film school too, because that's all you write when you're writing a film script is dialogue with action lines.
Yeah, so I read some of the, I'm currently reading, I don't know if you know Roy Peter Clark. He has a very good book called Writing Tools, 55 strategies of writing tools. And one of them, he says, remember the cinematic view, and always, so it's like being the camera person doing the movie. You start from way out, or you start with the close up, and you keep moving the angle and the perspective and the viewing point of view. So it's, aside from the character point of view, you need to think of the camera point of view.
Yeah.
So lots of good
the main problem with my Jason stories is that they're written in the first person, which there's an awful lot of internal thought that goes on, and that's a huge difference between screenwriting and writing novels. Is that when you're writing film scripts, you don't have the luxury of internal thought. You can only show what's on screen in the camera, unless you have your character narrating, which is considered a no-no.
They're all interesting challenges. That's part of what I enjoyed about the first 3 novels is they're written in the 1980s. So it was kind of fun to reflect on technology. You know, back in the days when a cell phone was the size of a brick.
I remember.
And or
shoebox.
it sat in a console, and it was only a mobile phone when the car was mobile because you couldn't
That's
remove
right.
it from the phone.
Yeah, and I remember computers back then too, because I'm an early
Yeah.
computer user. I was using computers in the 1970s when I was a travel agent, because
Yeah.
we had the Air Canada Reservac system, and that's how we communicated with the airlines and issued tickets and everything. So I've never been afraid of computers, but we've certainly gone through a lot of evolution with them. Remember the
Yeah,
first
well,
Apple, the Macintosh,
yeah.
that little box.
Well, that was part of the challenge that I added to my fourth novel, is that not only did I move it forward 30 years, so I have to get the technology right and talk about modern hacking, Russian hackers and otherwise, and cell phone surveillance. How do people track you on your phone and all that? So I had to do a little more research and update my own knowledge.
I can imagine, because that's a hell of a lot of research to get to the point where you know intimately how that all works.
Yeah, I kind of use the theory that, does it sound plausible? Is it possible? And is it, because we learn these things. There's a lot of things we don't know about what's going on, but we can assume that there's.
But who's going to challenge you? That's
the one
more
surveillance than we know about.
That's the one thing I learned when I was writing spy novels, is who's going to challenge you if you're wrong? Are the spies going to come out and say, "Oh no, that's not how it's done"?
Yeah,
so your readers, you assume a certain amount of ignorance on the part of your readers that you could probably get away with, because
that's right.
they don't know any more than you do.
Yeah, that's it. That's why I say it needs to be plausible. At least it's like the plot line.
Absolutely.
That doesn't sound right.
Yep.
That doesn't work.
That's something somebody raised, that an interesting question about me writing about a jazz musician. Is somebody said, I absolutely thought that you had a background in jazz music, or you managed a band, or you toured with a band or something, and I haven't. I've made it all up. So I'm fortunate in that I have a couple of musician friends who put me right and give me hints and give me I run things past them. They say, yes, that sounds absolutely what it would be like.
Those are the kind of positive reviews that are very encouraging and keep you motivated to keep working at it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it means I'm doing something right.
Yeah, they get the hidden message, or they learn something, or they enjoy the
I don't have any hidden messages. I'm not writing deep literature.
Okay, and you're not writing social commentary, or
no. I had a mentor back in the 1970s in Regina. His name is Ken Mitchell. He's a very well-known prairie writer, and he was teaching creative writing at the University of Regina when I was there, and he sort of took me under his wing, and I'm still using things that he taught me back then, especially about dialogue and about telling stories. And his main advice was, just tell a really good story. That's what your job is as a writer, because I think the mistake a lot of beginning writers do is they, especially if they've done a degree in literature, because that's all a degree in literature is focused on, is finding meaning in the author's words and trying to understand what they were saying when they didn't really state it. And I have so little time for that now. It's like,
interesting. No. That was my last question for you. With all your education and training and knowledge of the English language and creative writing, did you find that that just raises obstacles and puts constraints on the things that you'd like to do?
It was the first thing I had to unlearn when I was when I was learning writing, was get rid of all that stuff that they taught you when you did your degree in literature, because a degree in lit is forensic dissection of another writer all the way through. And it's like, that's not what, it's a good background, but that's not what you need to know to be a writer. What you need to know to be a writer is how to write a story, how to tell a story. Let the analysis happen by people who want to do that after the fact. You just get on with my favorite, my favorite description of plotting is, you take your character, you put them up in a tree, and you throw stones at them until they come down. That is story writing in an essence, and it works for short stories, it works for novels, it works for screenplays. That's what you have to do, and that's what your job is as a writer, not to write the next great Canadian novel that is on par with Margaret Atwood.
Yeah, no, that's right, and that's what I find, and it's I hate to make the golf analogy, but sometimes the worst thing you can do is to take a lesson or read a book or study another author in this case, or read a book of instruction, and then you can't write after that. You can't hit the golf ball straight anymore because you're thinking about too many things. And at some point you just got to set all the rules aside and what you've learned and other people's examples or the models you've followed, and just say, okay, now let my creative brain work. and that's when you sort of, when you produce something that accomplishes what you'd like to do, it sort of reinforces your confidence, and you
Well,
keep going from
I'm
there.
really fond of telling people who ask me, well, how do I write a story? I said, just tell the story to yourself. We're all natural born storytellers.
Yeah.
We tell jokes. That's a story when you tell a joke. And there's different jokes. There's short ones, there's long ones, there's elaborate ones. Just sit down and tell the story to yourself. And that's your first draft. And you're the only person that's going to see that first draft.
Yeah, no,
And
I
then
agree. And I say the same thing. And, it starts with, I've always enjoyed telling stories. And if you can get a laugh, it's even better. Or you can see people say, aha, or they're taking notes. Fantastic. I must have got
Doesn't that drive you wonderfully when you
Yeah.
get a reaction from people? Like if you're doing a public reading,
Yeah.
or or you get a review and people have read it and have enjoyed it and have told you. I think we suffer from a lack of that a lot. Like it's a very solitary occupation, writing, and the only chance we get to get feedback from people is when we do public readings, or we get reviews with the people who actually take the time to write reviews to tell you that they've enjoyed it. Are you an introvert? I'm a total introvert. You'd never know it from me talking now, but
I even admit to being antisocial and loving this isolation in COVID.
Me too. I think we all do. We're all going, so what's different?
It's going to be hard to get back out meeting real people, but
I know.
I enjoy meeting strangers and making conversation. I really hate the sort of networking events and making small talk and that sort of superficial schmoozing. I'm not good at, and I really don't like to spend time at it, but I do like to get to know people. And now, of course, I'm thinking, okay, now how would I write this character into my next book?
One thing I did, which was really, really good training for me, was I was a freelance writer for a while. I wrote magazine articles for Flair magazine. And that taught me really well how to communicate with people I didn't know, and just to talk to people about anything on earth. It was a really good training. So.
Yeah, no, that's it. Let's, I think we need to end this conversation fairly soon before we overrun our limit on the YouTube channel for Crime Writers of Canada. So let's talk a little bit about Crime Writers of Canada. What's your experience with them? Have they helped in your process of writing and producing?
It's been wonderful. I actually only joined a couple of years ago because I was working full time and I didn't have time to do anything like this, and I hadn't switched to mysteries. But as soon as I switched to mysteries, I was at an event at the Vancouver Library, and the crime writers were there, and they were walking around actually introducing themselves and signing people up. So I, yes, absolutely, I'll join. And very soon after I joined, I got the opportunity to be on the board. So I went, okay, if you don't mind me being a newbie, I will be on your board. So I've been doing that almost since I joined. Yeah, it's been a wonderful opportunity to meet other writers, either virtually or in person. And I've got to know them all so well. And I made it a point to go, before we got COVID, to go to their launches, because I think we should have a representation at people's launches and just show our support. I mean, you're a member of Crime Writers. I should be there to help you launch your next book. So I take pictures and I put them up on social media and talk about it and stuff. And it was very much appreciated, the ones that I went to.
Yeah, I found too that was, I came across Crime Writers of Canada because of the Arthur Ellis Awards, which we've changed the name now, but the Arthur Ellis Awards, I thought he was some famous Canadian writer I'd never heard of.
Hangman.
It's a different story, which you can read on the website if you're interested. But, I thought, well, I should, it was good enough for some of these people that made their career, so I should submit my novel. And then I decided I should join. And I have also very much enjoyed the association with other writers, because I think the value is when you spend time with and exchange ideas and experiences and advice with other writers who are accomplished and have made the mistakes. It's like entrepreneurs. I very much believe in sharing stories between entrepreneurs for the same reason. We can learn together, and you can avoid some of the mistakes I've already made. Some of you will insist on making yourself, but that's okay too.
Even though I've been writing for a really, really long time, like my first novel came out in 1989, I still feel very much a newbie. I still feel, because I only switched to mysteries a couple of years ago, 2017, in fact, I still feel very much a beginner in the genre. So I'm learning new things all the time. which I
Okay. Yeah.
put down
Well,
to crime writers. Absolutely. Yeah.
that's important in whatever we do. Is keep learning and getting
Yeah.
better to do better.
Yeah. Plus, I've taken some initiatives. I'm getting us involved in the Surrey International Writers Conference, which is a huge conference, which we haven't had a presence at all in the past. And we
Yeah.
can't have a presence this year because it's going virtual again. But next year, I'm going to get us into their trade show. We will have a table there and we will be showing off our books.
Okay, good. Well, it's been a pleasure to get to know you better, Winona, and I'll look forward to meeting again. Thanks for your time today. I'll look forward to meeting you again at the next event with Crime Writers of Canada.
In the next board meeting too.
And the next board meeting. Yeah.
Lovely
a
to
lot.
chat with you. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Okay,
Bye.
bye for now.